Performing a gratitude practice twice or 3 times or even just once a week can lead to a pervasive, a long-lasting impact on subjective well-being. The key thing is it has to be the right gratitude practice, and we're going to talk about what the right gratitude practice looks like. For those of you that are coming to this conversation thinking, gratitude practice, oh, that's kind of wishy-washy or woo, it's going to involve, putting your hand on your heart and feeling into all the amazing things that you happen to have, even when things are really terrible. That's not where we're going at all. The neurochemical, the anti-inflammatory, and the neural circuit mechanisms that gratitude can invoke are equally on par with some of the effects of pharmacology, of things like high-intensity interval training and exercise, and other things that we think of as kind of more potent forms of self-intervention. The data actually point to the fact that a gratitude practice is a very, very potent way in which you can steer your mental and physical health in positive directions, and that those effects are very long-lasting. What's really beautiful about gratitude practices is that if they're performed repeatedly, and not even that often, but repeatedly, then one can actually shift their neural circuits such that the seesaw that I'm calling pro-social versus defensive behaviors can actually start to tilt. And the little hinge, if you will, on the seesaw in the middle can be adjusted in a little tighter when the side for gratitude and for well-being and for feelings of happiness is a little bit higher. We now know with certainty that a regular gratitude practice can shift the pro-social circuit so that they dominate our physiology and our mindset in ways that can enhance many, many aspects of our physical and mental health by default. So we don't always have to constantly be in practice trying to be happy. Gratitude is a mindset that activates prefrontal cortex, and in doing so sets the context of your experience such that you can derive tremendous health benefits, which leads us to the question, what kind of gratitude practice is going to accomplish this, right? Because it is not simply the case that I could take a knife, please don't do this experiment, and cut my hand and say, I'm going to enjoy this. I'm doing this because this is good for me, and it won't hurt. Of course it'll hurt, but I can't lie to myself. If I have some knowledge that cutting myself is bad for me, that's very hard to override. And so the medial prefrontal cortex has a tremendous capacity to set context, and it does that beautifully with respect to gratitude. But that requires a very specific set of practices. We can't simply lie to ourselves or quote unquote fake it until we make it. Neural circuitry is very powerful and very plastic. It can be modified. And it's very context dependent, but it's not stupid. And when you lie to yourself about whether or not an experience is actually good for you or not, your brain knows. So what does an effective gratitude practice look like? Let's examine what an ineffective, what a poor gratitude practice looks like, because therein lies some really important information, including the fact that I think millions of other people out there are doing it wrong. Most gratitude practices that you see online and that people talk about in various talks and so forth involve something like writing down or reciting or thinking about 5 or 10 or 3 or 20 things that you're especially grateful for. Then really trying to feel into some of those, really try and think deeply about the emotions, the sensations, the perceptions that are associated with those particular people, places, and things on your list. Most studies actually point to the fact that that style of gratitude practice is not particularly effective in shifting your neural circuitry, your neural chemistry, or your somatic circuitry, the circuits in your body, because you literally have organs and neural circuits that are connected. That form of just expressing thanks, expressing gratitude, is not the most effective way to shift these pro-social circuits in positive ways for one's physiology and anatomy and psychology. Turns out that the most potent form of gratitude practice is not a gratitude practice where you give gratitude or express gratitude, but rather where you receive gratitude, where you receive thanks. And this, to me, was very surprising. There are a number of studies about this now. One in particular that I think is interesting. What they did is they had coworkers write a letter of gratitude, of thanks to another coworker, unbeknownst to the other coworker. And then they sat down together and then they imaged brain activity as this letter was being read and as the letter was being received. And it showed very robust effects on these prefrontal networks that pointed to the fact that receiving gratitude is actually much more potent in terms of the positive shifts that it can create than giving gratitude. So this raises a couple of important points. First of all, if you are somebody who is prone to write letters of gratitude or saying things that are genuine expressions of gratitude, this could be by text or in person or by phone, you have within you a very potent form of shifting somebody else's neurology. Now, that's wonderful, and I think there are many people like that out there. But for many people who want to experience the positive effects of gratitude, it's probably not the most advantageous approach to just sit around waiting, hoping that someone's going to deliver all these letters or words of gratitude. How is it that you can create that sense of receiving gratitude for yourself and thereby derive the effects of gratitude as outlined in this particular study? And there we go back to the important work of the great Antonio Damasio, who explored these neural correlates of gratitude. What they did was interesting. Rather than have people express gratitude, they had the subjects go into the scanner, so their brains are being imaged, and they watched narratives, stories about other people experiencing positive things in their life. And in this case, these were powerful stories. These were stories about survivors of genocide. So that's what they're watching. The subjects were subjects that were not survivors of genocide. So they were watching these videotapes of people that had survived genocide and had people help them along the way as part of their story of survival. What's really important about this study, and is really important for all of us to know, is that these stories of other people receiving things that were powerful for them in their life trajectory is embedded in story. The neural circuits associated with prosocial behaviors and with gratitude become robustly active when they start to feel some affiliation with the person telling the story. So let's just take a moment and start to think about how we are going to build out the ultimate gratitude practice, meaning the most effective gratitude practice. It's very clear that receiving gratitude is powerful, but it's also very clear that waiting around to receive that gratitude is an impractical approach. It's very worthwhile, I believe, to find someone's narrative that's powerful for you. It's got to be a story that inspires you. We can actually observe someone else getting help, someone else giving help, and that observation of our species doing that for one another allows us to experience the feeling of a genuine chemical and neural circuit activation lift, if you will. It's clear that an effective gratitude practice has to be repeated from time to time. So what I would not suggest is that we build a protocol in which you're constantly foraging for inspirational stories over and over again. The most effective protocol or tool is going to be either to think into when somebody was thankful for something that you did and really start to think about how you felt in receiving that gratitude, or I should say, imagining or thinking about deeply the emotional experience of somebody else receiving help. Now, what narrative you select is going to be very dependent on you and your taste. It's going to be very dependent on what resonates with you. But again, I want to emphasize that the story that you select does not have to have any semblance to your own life experience. It's just about what happens to move you. And so the way that one could do this, and actually I've started this practice for myself on the basis of the learnings I've had in the last few weeks around preparing for this episode, is to find a story that's particularly meaningful for you, and then to just take some short notes, bullet point notes, maybe list out, for instance, on just a small sheet of paper about what the struggle was, what the help was, and something about how that impacts you emotionally. Okay, this is something just for you. You don't have to share it with anybody. That kind of shorthand list of bullet point notes serves as your shorthand for getting into this mode that we're calling gratitude, and actually closely mimics a lot of what was done in these various studies. Now, this could be done literally for 1 minute or 2 minutes or 3 minutes. This is not an extensively long practice. And that's another beauty of gratitude practices, is that they have these outsized positive effects on so many aspects of our physiology, but these are very short practices. They're the kind of thing that you can do walking to your car. They're the kind of thing you can just sit down for a minute and set a timer and do, because they are really about changing your state of mind and body. Thus far, we've mainly talked about the effects of gratitude on neural circuit activation and changes, but we haven't talked a lot yet about the changes changes in health metrics, in things like inflammation or reductions in inflammation and immunity and things of that sort. A really interesting recent study exploring neural mechanisms of the health benefits of gratitude in women, a randomized controlled trial. The first author is Hazlitt. Women who had a regular gratitude practice of the sort that we've been talking about up until now showed reductions in amygdala activity, a brain area associated with threat detection, an intimate part of the fear network in the brain. So reductions in amygdala activation and large reductions in the production of something called TNF-alpha, tumor necrosis factor alpha, and IL-6, interleukin-6. TNF-alpha and IL-6 are inflammatory cytokines. These are chemicals that exist in your body and that are released from cells when there is damage or kind of a systemic stress, when your system is in duress. And in the short term, they can be beneficial. They can call in signals for wound healing and repair of cells, etc. But you don't want TNF-alpha and IL-6 levels to be too high, and you don't want those levels to be up for too long. And so this study is really nice because they showed significant effects in reducing TNF-alpha and IL-6 in response to a gratitude practice.